Good morning, everybody. How are you? This habit that you have cultivated over time to be punctual, you're going to thank yourself one day. As executives will tell you at one point that there is no such thing as on time. You're either late or you're early. So this is a really good habit. Hi, Alexandra. Now it does feel like a Monday morning lecture. But again, I do note the names who are always on time. This is a very good habit. So yeah, don't get complacent. Keep up with it. I was rereading the Neomachian Ethics as authored by Aristotle. If you can, pick up a copy online or at the library. Nicomachean Ethics. And I quite like this sentence that Aristotle said once. For the things that we need to learn before we can do them, we learn by doing them. It was a bit apt for this particular topic that you have today, which is on innovation. Now, we've looked at creativity and a host of other things in the past few weeks, but the primary focus for this week is innovation. It's also equally difficult for me to wrap it up in 50 minutes because my PhD was also at SPRU, Science Policy Research Unit, based at the University of Sussex, who still retains globally rank one for technology transfer and innovation management. My point is I have a lot to share, but that's just not possible in 50 minutes. I'll try to keep it sort of succinct and pointed, but some of you may have looked at the slides already. For this week, you will see that quite a few slides towards the end. I've just mentioned that this is for you to read independently after the lecture is over. Now, if you do pick up some of those theories and would like to discuss, send me an email, I'll set up a meeting, we can have an extended discussion. I would like that because that's what we used to do back at the University of Oxford. Seminars would run for 4 or 5 hours and students had to read at least 10, 12 research papers before coming to the lesson. So do pick up on those theories that I will be mentioning today, discussing some of them, and then also I've listed quite a few others towards the end. So see which one is more sort of you can connect with them. Now, just before I start, I think we've come a long way. This is week 7, as you might have noticed. So this is more than halfway through the semester. But at the same time, I wanted to make sure that we are not moonwalking. So you're taking one step forward and 2 steps backward. For example, if I ask you a question, don't worry, I'm not going to. But if I do ask you a question from week 2 or week 3, I might surprise myself to see how many of you actually remember some of those content. Now, there's no stopping you from sort of getting started with your assessment because part 1 of the assessment has got almost nothing to do with the interviews and the entrepreneurs. So all you have to do is just look at the resources for the first 5 weeks and also the lecture slides and the resources that I've shared for this week to build up your part 1. It will take time. I had a few questions from a couple of you. I could have expected a lot more, but from the nature of those questions, I can tell that you have actually started to think about a few things, which tools to use, which theories to apply. So in a way, as we progress through the slides, I'll give you some ideas, then you can sort of start working on it. But please do start writing. Some of the topics that I wanted to point out today, because this is week 7 and very soon we'll have Easter break and then semester is over, sayonara, as they say in Japanese. So sustainability is something I would like you to sort of engage more with. The concept is an umbrella term, just like globalization is an umbrella term. There is no one specific definition of sustainability. There's a popular one from 1987 given by the Brundtland Commission. But what I would encourage you to do is to look at the business society sustainability nexus. So the interplay between business and society, what sort of sustainable practices businesses apply and sort of take on. It's not just climate change. It's not just about being carbon efficient, but a lot of other factors also, a lot of other variables are also considered when a business is going sustainable, including the triple bottom line, people, planet, profit, which is fundamental. The other thing is I'm sure you have come across by now from other modules and also this one. We talk about pastel as one of the models, which is dated. One of the limitations of pastel is it's extremely resource expensive. You have to keep doing it ongoingly. So you can't do it every 6 months or every 2 years, because by the time you collect the data, these are macroeconomic forces. They are changing all the time. You have got zero control over any of them. So you have to make sure that you are staying updated, staying informed. Uh, but that's pastel. These are macroeconomic forces that we look at. But at the same time, you have to understand there are other forces that are at play, and stakeholders, wider group of stakeholders are interested to see if you are paying attention to certain other forces that are not necessarily market forces. So you've got a set of market forces and non-market forces. So I've mentioned ESG here, which is environment, social, and governance. Corporate governance is obviously it's a big subject of discussion that we can't really afford to do it right now, but make sure that you know that ESG is actually a priority these days for any businesses. Sometimes they're also, not sometimes, most of the times, corporations also publishing a separate ESG report, or they're asking organizations like BCG, Boston Consulting Group, or the PwC, which is more popular here, to prepare an ESG report for them. So dig into it, see what ESG does, and if you're looking for investors or your company is going public, they will look for this ESG component. Previously, it was not that popular or required because previously you can get away with saying I do CSR, corporate social responsibility, I give something back to the society, and some of them are quite innovative. But today ESG is a requirement. The third component, the third point here is Industry 4.0, which I keep repeating it because this is the era that we live in. Most of the discussions around, excuse me, innovation does fall in the particular framework of Industry 4.0. Because again, we are not just looking at SpaceX, trying to colonize Mars and all those ideas, but also what sort of problems or global problems some of the businesses are addressing and trying to solve. Those are more practical and pragmatic. So it's called 4.0 because you've got intelligent system, agile, automation, and cloud. Okay, so these are the four components of industry. That's why it's four. The fourth concept is okay. All right, I just want to make sure I don't sound like Al Pacino towards the end of the lecture. The fourth one is in entrepreneurial architecture. It's something that we have looked at, and there are additional slides and resources on it. If you look at our Soul site from the previous weeks, understand how this architecture is built and also maintained and sustained over time. So it does capture the interplay of various components within an organization, such as leadership and management. They're not the same. Leadership, management, systems, structure, which could be organizational structure as well as the power structure. So see how these four components help building or sometimes breaking the entrepreneurial architecture. So make sure that you know the concept. There are slides on it if you recall. So go back to the slides because any organization that you choose, should you decide to go with A or B for your assessment, make sure that you can capture the architecture and how it is built and how it is maintained. The next one is the difference between creative environment and creative atmosphere. We did a number of activities in the seminars, trying to see if some of you had some fantastic ideas. Both the groups on Tuesday and Thursday, I'm sure the other two groups on Thursday also did the same. How do you build a creative environment? How do you keep nourishing it? And how does it lead to the creation of creative atmosphere? Because atmosphere is something that you can't really define. You have to have the environment that actually leads towards creation of a creative atmosphere. So encouraging free thinking, risk taking, innovative ways of group working, and so on. So just make sure that you know a difference. Don't use the two concepts synonymously. Just like don't use leaders and managers in the same sentence. It's always proper to use the concepts leaders and followers, because managers are also leaders. So if you confuse yourself by saying leaders are managers, managing is one of the, or leading is part of a manager's job. So when you're using leadership, use the concept followership in the same sentence. They're not the same. Sometimes we do loosely use terms synonymously or interchangeably. that should not be the case, especially if you're getting a business degree. You should be a bit more informed than how people talk in general without business knowledge. The next concept is the concept of self-efficacy. We did a couple of activities in the seminars. There was a test that also gave you an overview, how you're doing with your self-efficacy. Go back to the test and see if your results have changed since week 2. I suppose in week 2, if you look at the preparation for week 2, I've also added a separate lecture slides on effectuation. That concept is really, really important. So go back to the slides. And if you've got any questions, obviously I'm here, or just find me in the seminars or email me. Effectuation is a concept that you would also like to pick up on for your assessment. See, what I'm doing is this is not just for assessment. These are some of the key concepts we have discussed. Sometimes we had to rush because of the time, but most of them we have looked at in depth in the seminar activities. So engage with them again. I just want you to not forget them, because as you progress with new concepts, make sure that you're not forgetting the previous ones, because it's sort of building on the previous concepts. The second last bullet point here is the theories of creativity and innovation. Here is an important question. I think one of you asked that, can we use a Delphi method or Lotus diagram or the Disney method? Now, we have done activities in the seminars, how to use Delphi technique, how to apply Disney method and Lotus map diagram. Those are tools to capture creativity. Okay, so those are sort of how you harness or how you sort of engage people in the process, in groups or in individually. For example, Delphi technique was more about individuals, and then they come together and share and see how close they are with one another, their research and so on. But those are tools to capture creativity. So the question is, where do creative ideas come from? This is a question we explored last week also. That's one, identifying the source and how to make it work, how to draw those creative ideas. What is the process or mechanism in place? Does the organization have got a system in place to capture the creative ideas? That's where these tools come to play. Those are not the theories of creativity and innovation. Those are tools. So if you look at the theories, I've given you one example here, Dyer's discovery skills. If you do remember when Paul from Enterprise Rent a Car, who shared a lot last week with all of us, towards the end, I think in order to answer one of your questions, I think it was a question on risk or creativity, he did mention something, and then I quickly made a note that this is what he's saying is actually what Dyer's discovery skills theory also mentioned. So that's an example of a theory. So don't confuse the theories with tools. So if you go back to the lecture slides, you will see I've mentioned that this is a model, this is a theory, and those are the tools. So that way you can differentiate, because how do you capture the ideas? That's great. But what do you do with it next? That's where the theories come in. I think you will capture it as you read more. So what I've done here is you will see the verses in capitals. So you got the theories of creativity and innovation versus the tools to capture creative ideas. Not the same necessarily. The final topic, which is quite big these days, open innovation, big in the sense that I found it quite pragmatic. It's not just a large organization engaged in open innovation, but also small and medium enterprises who are also foraying or sort of making their mark with open innovation. We've got a discussion on open innovation today in the lecture. I'm also happy to pick it up in the seminars equally. So again, just revise some of those concepts, make sure that you're absolutely clear. I feel it's just great because level 4, I mean, you will not believe how much some of these contents, not just for this module, other modules also, will inform your modules in level 5 and level 6. So, you know, if you got the foundation right and at least you're familiar with the concepts, later on you can afford to have a bigger range of discussions around this across different modules on leadership, organizational behavior, supply chain, marketing, and so on. So one of the things that I don't want to start the lecture with a definition of innovation, because you can with your smart devices. But how fast things are changing, I think that's something I wouldn't say the word sort of worrying, that would be the wrong choice, but it's too fast for some generations to catch up on really quick. One of the observations I had, this was back in 2015-16, I suppose. So I was in Toronto airport in Canada, and I landed, and there was this immigration where you have to sort of, you know, make sure that you're crossing the borders legally and stuff. And usually what do you expect? You've got, you know, queues, and you've got 7, 8 sort of, immigration officers, and they're waiting for us to go one by one and present our documents and then go in. There was none. So it's like, what happened here? So all they had was in that immigration center, immigration sort of zone, they had about 16 machines. Okay, so they looked like time machines. Okay, so every one of us had to basically walk into this machine and follow the instructions, and it was ridiculously complex. So, this is where you give the biometrics, this is where you scan your passport, this is where you sort of scan the other page, reverse it, twist it, and so many instructions, which obviously it was, possible to get it done. It took about 10 minutes roughly. And then the machine will give you the stamp and then say you can go. So there's nobody to talk to there. And that's okay. I managed, quite a few others also managed, but we had, passengers from a particular demographics, elderly population. They were pretty confused what to do there because there's nobody to talk to, nobody to seek help, and they were just confused. Like, I mean, of course they can. It's just a totally new practice. So the speed of innovation and the amount of time we get to get used to it, they are not always compatible. So the speed of innovation is good for the society. Sure, breakthroughs, big breakthroughs, radical innovation, or even incremental innovation changes our lives. Ease, convenience, speed, all good, but also are we allowing the society the time to catch up or sort of catch on with this speed of innovation? That's really an observation. I'm sure you've come across different sorts of. Similarly, if you speak to somebody from mainland China, and the last time they were there in the country in 2015, and they visited, let's say last month, it's a 100% cashless society. So whether you are, getting a metro ticket at the tube, or reserving a hotel, booking a flight, getting a movie tickets, whatever it might be, it's all digitally using Alipay and WeChat Pay. So this shift, I mean, some of them couldn't recognize the last time they were there in the country, and now it's like the speed is just nobody's taking cash. There is no good luck finding an ATM or a bank that actually is busy. You won't see any queues inside a bank because nobody does the traditional banking practices anymore. So it's great the technology has made the lives simple, and it's all very connected. All the devices talk to each other, all the systems talk to each other, but at the same time, the speed and intensity, they're not always the same. They're not always sort of compatible in some cases. So the forces shaping our world today are immense, complex, surprising, and also challenging, which is why the nature of risk assessment, different types of crises that businesses face today are quite different than 10, 20 years ago. One of the reasons why I'm mentioning this is also not for this assessment, but also your other business modules. When you look at the literature, let's say you're finding an article on crisis leadership or crisis management in organizations. And there are lots of literature starting from 1960s and 70s and 80s, and you will see you have to identify some of the seminal authors. Okay, so the authors have been cited a number of times, and they are the key figures in the subject discipline. That's all great, but also try to find some contemporary authors. Look at the last 10 years. So have a mix when you're reviewing the literature. It should be a mix of contemporary and seminal work, not just old literature, because the nature of businesses and the complexity or the composition of challenges that they face today are different. So you have to identify that, make sure that you know that how or what they are and how they have changed over time. This is important because you also have to comment how businesses can adapt to these forces, not only macroeconomic forces such as the ones that are identified by Pestel, but also forces that can be challenging from within the organization, which could come in the way of successfully commercializing an idea, or the business model doesn't work anymore because of some of these forces. So that's the general landscape that we function in: the crisis management, leadership, how you motivate employees, different nature of contract does affect the way businesses work. This is an interesting research. I think it was published by Telegraph 2017. Number of years it took for each product to gain 50 million users. Okay, this is really, really interesting. If you look at electricity, you got 46 years to gain 50 million users. I mean, even today, I think if you look at the statistics, yeah, I think it's accurate. One out of three people do not have access to electricity. So that's about 2 billion people. have got absolutely no electricity. Internet. Internet is something that I was coming to, not electricity. Electricity is about 850 million people globally without access to electricity globally. So that's a lot. 850 million people. Then you've got ATMs that took 18 years, and now it's sort of obsolete in some ways, in some markets, as I was saying, because societies are going cashless. I use the example of China, but there's a number of countries now that are heading towards that direction. But it took 18 years to reach 50 million users. I mean, what is the world population today? Can anyone tell me? Okay, probably you're going to Google, so I'm just going to save some time. About 8 billion people. About 8 billion people. So you can do some research and see what is the world population today. Then you've got cell phones, 12 years. Internet, that is 7 years. But 1 out of 3 people in the world, average number, do not have access to internet. So that's about 2.5 billion people. And yeah, so that's great. Then you've got Facebook. Within 3 years, you've got 50 million users. Pokemon Go took 19 days to gain 50 million users. I mean, it's just so interesting. But airlines, 68 years, and then Pokemon Go. This was a success. I do remember 2015 or 6. I think it was 2015. So I was running this summer school at the London School of Economics on managing innovation and development economics. And students came from the US, from UCLA and UC Berkeley. And after the class, they were just in a rush to get to somewhere. So I said, okay, they are here for 4 weeks for the summer schools. Summer schools usually last for 4 years. So I was curious, like, so are you guys traveling today? Because you work very closely, like 20 hours every week for 4 weeks. That's a lot of collaboration. They said, no, I have to get to the different places in London, Leicester Square. Some of them were going to Brighton, because I was also teaching at Sussex then. They had to go to the Brighton Pier to collect specific Pokemon on their phone. That was so interesting, and people were out all the time, 2 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, just to go and collect these Pokemons on the phones, just to remain competitive. Because the thing is, they were from the US, and they were here in the UK for 4 weeks. So obviously their collection set was larger than their friends back home. So it was just a matter of like, I've got more Pokemons than you have. I think that was just an innovative model that actually worked. Pokemon Go, which took 19 days to gain 50 million users. By the way, that did affect their grades because they didn't have much sleep or time to work on their assessments. They're out all the time collecting those. Okay, so the other side of this particular slide was not only the time that it took for these innovation to gain 50 million users, regardless how useful they were, but also at the same time, you can identify some of them are just not useful anymore. So at one point, yes, they solved a problem, and they were necessary, not just a luxury. They're necessary. For example, ATM or credit cards or iPods. But then it either got replaced or they don't have the same value anymore. 7 billion, Alexander. Yes, okay, good. And growing, I suppose, 7 billion plus. Right. So how do you define innovation here? I mean, so I did refer to a textbook. I think this was in lecture 1, which is also one of the core textbooks for this module by Tid and Besant, Managing Innovation. I think so. There are lots of long definitions and sophisticated ones, but this one really captures the essence of the concept of innovation. So it's a process that involves the conversion of new knowledge into a new product, process, or service, and the putting of this new product, process, or service into actual use. That's pretty much it. So it doesn't matter if it's a radical big innovation or an incremental innovation. It also matters how you position yourself in the industry rather than what you do. This quote by Margaret Heffernan, I quite like it. She said, for good ideas and true innovation, you need human interaction, conflicts, and debate. So yes, you've got the smart devices, that's all great, but also talk to each other, because here, the spaghetti model of innovation. If I ask you how many of you remember this model from week 3 and week 4, the chat box might be quiet for some time. We have mentioned this spaghetti model of innovation. I think I did an exercise, an activity in the seminars also. How do you network with each other, go to events, find the right people to talk to, not just randomly connect with people on LinkedIn who you don't know, but actually having communication going on. So reaching out to different people who have got different views. If you've got a fixed mindset person, you would like to interact with a flexible mindset person. It could be out of your comfort zone, but that's what you need. So talking to different people, reaching out to different networks, and also using different social capital, accessing social capital. That also enhances and expands your ideas, perspectives, and also sometimes shifts your mindset a bit, which takes time. It's not just changing your state of mind, but transforming your mindset. That takes longer. But also talking about different things. If you are studying business, you can also speak with students, let's say at the university, with different backgrounds, doing arts, media, dance, filmmaking, whatever it might be. I think it's really sort of the beauty of multidisciplinarity is something that you can experience once you are engaging. So the networks that you have, or the networks that you're creating, it does provide, sort of accessing collective efficiency and efficacy, surely collective learning, the different nature of risks and how do you assess different risks, how do you cope with different risks, and the intersection of different knowledge sets and experience sets. There's a very interesting model. If you just type the capitals framework, just type capitals framework. I think there's 7 different forms of capital that you can build and maintain within the organization or within the society. The authors are Cornelia Flora and Jan Flora. So they're retired. They're based in Texas and Kansas universities. I've walked with them. It's a great model that you can also use in different contexts, the capitals framework. But this particular model, the spaghetti model of innovation, is given by John Besant. It's actually in the textbook that I've referred in the past. One of the things I would like to say in this case, the textbook by Besant and Joe Ted, it is an essential textbook. Universities, so I've seen this in other countries, not only here. They're based at Sussex, the key authors in the field, but also the way the books are written, all the editions, it's very easy to read. Examples, the illustrations are quite contemporary and fresh, and it doesn't read like a textbook. It just reads like one of the books that you pick up at the airport when you've just got a 2 or 4 hours flight and finish it on the way. It's very easy to read the examples. You can relate to them because they're quite, as I said, it's quite fresh and relatable. So it doesn't read like a sort of hardcore contextual textbook, academic textbook. So that's one of the contributions in the book, the spaghetti model of innovation. I think university is a great place to actually apply this spaghetti model because you got access to all these different networks, and because of your current affiliation, you can also access related networks that you can find in the university. So quite a few things here. I mean, if you look at, I mentioned Industry 4.0, but all this innovation that you will see, majority of them, first of all, it's a fact. If you look at a range of literature looking at innovation, who funds innovation? Basically, is it the private sector? Is it the public? That's a big question. Where is the money coming from? All this major $7-8 billion innovation taking place. Sometimes universities get funded, like Sussex does, because of SPRU, Science Policy Research Unit, being there, or the LSE or other places. Majority of the innovation is funded by the state, and it's consistent across countries. So the public sector actually funds and takes the risk for radical innovation. So investments are coming from the state. That's one thing to remember. But if you look at some of the other factors around us, other forces, you've got rapid urbanization. So for example, if you look at mainland China, something that Elon Musk picked up, that if you basically put all the solar panels in the western part of the country, that's how Solar City was born. You can basically power the entire mainland China because majority of the population, 80-90% of them, lives on the eastern side because of the rural urban migration. Also people moving from tier 3, tier 4 cities to tier 1, tier 2 cities, which are also on the eastern side of the country. But it does obviously bring its own challenges and so on. But that's also a consequence. So one of the things that we got as a consequence is the concept of smart cities. I don't know if you've come across this, smart cities. So do some research and see what smart cities are and what is the interest, because it's state supported. Municipalities and local councils are working together with the government to build smart cities, basically using information communication technologies, ICTs, to make cities and regions more efficient, technologically sound, collect a higher level of analytics, and more secure and safe. So smart cities is something that you could also look at. So some of the technological breakthroughs are happening there. Also, if you are in the securities business, security systems, not financial securities, debentures, but securities, that's also a sector you can do well, because that's an essential component of a smart city. Then you've got climate change and resource scarcity. Lots of innovation here. If you're going green, some businesses go green, some businesses are green by nature. So if you are sort of actively or proactively taking up green measures to reduce your carbon footprints, that's going green. But if a company is in the environmental sector from day one, you are a green company. So know the difference, because you have come across papers and articles where this business is going green. Not all of them, because some of them are green by nature. But one other forces that also affects the innovation, or where the innovation is coming from, is shift in the global economic power. So look east policy, for example. So if you're making a big FDI investment, foreign direct investment, and foreign institutional investment, and these are huge. I think I mentioned this in one of my seminars last week. One of the indicators that some of the sectors are growing, some of the industries are growing in a country, regardless where it is, look at the FDI, how much is coming in and how much is going out of the country. FDI could be done in collaboration with the government or private sector and so on. So see what is the foreign direct investment percentage in BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And also specifically identify which sectors are receiving most of those FDI and what sort of innovation is taking place. It's really great, because you start with the country, identify the industries, and then look at specific firms who are leading those industries and what sort of innovations are taking place. Finally, demographic and social change. This is important, because if you look at some markets like Brazil and Japan, the number of people who are retiring every year from the workforce is higher than the total number of new people joining the workforce, which could be potentially a problem for the next 20 years. You're not talking about 5 or 10 years, a generational problem. So how do you capture it? Who should be your partners, and which countries should you be looking at? It's interesting when you say BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, as emerging countries, or the new power and so on, whatever terminologies people like to use. But they're not an economic union, BRICS. They're hugely dissimilar countries, even though they're grouped together because they are emerging. So the demographics are quite different if you look at Brazil and China compared to India or South Africa. So yeah, partner selection is one of the things to identify here. If you are entering these markets, how do you decide which partners to work with? What sort of risks could emerge? Here, it's a sort of practical, not of advice, but sort of a research finding from Wall Street Journal. The hard and soft skills you will need, given all these things happening around us. So these, on the right hand side, you'll see in 2015, these were the skills required by the industry. 2020, they're not different. It's just the order have changed. So for example, you've got creativity, which is third on the list, used to be number 10 in 2015. Emotional intelligence, or EQ, just like you've got IQ, you can also take EQ tests online. Number 6, I don't see that in 2015 anywhere in top 10. I'm a bit surprised to see negotiation as number 9, because this is really important. This is probably the most important thing to learn, especially in the business school or in business, negotiation, communication. Again, that was number 5 in 2015. And importantly, cognitive flexibility, which is number 10. So I think just make sure that you know what they are and how you're doing with them. You can also identify that I'm great on the first 6. I need to work on the last 4, or order doesn't matter. But make sure that you know what they are, because they are required by the employer. Because most of the time they're not looking at the CV, because, for example, I'm sure you'll have fantastic looking LinkedIn profiles when you are level 6. Everybody is this close to getting the next Nobel Prize tomorrow. Everybody's just amazing on LinkedIn. But make sure that your CV is not bragging about things that you're not sure about. So I've interviewed, I don't know, hundreds of last year and the previous years in different industries, it's really hard to capture what skills they have versus skills that the thing that they have and put it on CV. So make sure that you know what they're at least. So that's really, really important. So given the complexity of the business environment today, these are some of the skills identified by the Wall Street Journal. One of the things, again, just before I move the slide, number 9 from the 2015 list, active listening. I think it's a lost art. Okay, majority of the time you're listening in order to respond, not listening to understand. Active listening is something that we can all practice daily, really pays off. Now, I mentioned Industry 4.0, but some of the major innovation, the illustrious 8, as I would call them, the 8 essential 8 technologies. You know, the Internet of Things, IoT, as you'll come across, as you have come across. You've got augmented reality, and I'm not talking about augmented reality and virtual reality, not just for video games and entertainment and media, but also applications of augmented reality, AR, in pharmaceutical and medical technology. Okay, so that's really, really, if you just look for augmented reality technology in the medical sector or medical technologies, see how these technologies are being used on a daily basis, really, really useful for the society. Then you've got the blockchain and AI, different sort of variations of AI, different applications across different sectors. Most recently, you've got the application of AI in the pharmaceutical industry. Look at some of the big players like GlaxoSmithKline, Ranbaxy, and a number of others. You've got 3D printing, drones, use of drones, again, for not just for delivery, but also industrial purposes. And then robots. One of the things I wanted to make sure that you know the difference between AI, deep learning, machine learning. They're not the same. So you talk about deep learning or machine learning. Of course, they underpin artificial intelligence. But just, I mean, yeah, this is something I wanted to mention this week. As you know already, I'm sure at least most of you know that you can access the LinkedIn learning courses for free if you're using the Soul site, because the university has got subscription. There's a course on deep learning. There's a course on machine learning. It should not take more than 2-3 days. At least I finished in a few hours because it was fairly straightforward. Just a couple of years ago. I think it was really important just to know the distinction, what they are, deep learning and machine learning, even if you've got nothing to do with it immediately or directly, so to speak. But yeah, you can obviously put it on your CV that you've done the course and taken the test, not just reviewed the materials, but you've also taken the test. So that's really important. We should know what's happening. But yeah, some of them just see what are the applications because it really matters. Getting back to Joe Tidd and John Bisson's 4Ps model. This is not the same as marketing 4Ps. Let me remind you again. It's a separate 4Ps. The name of the book, once again, those of you are thinking, okay, I have to go back and find lecture slide 1. It's called Managing Innovation, Integrating Technological, Market, and Organizational Change. The font size is minimized here, just under Tidd and Bisson's 4Ps model. Pick up a copy at the library or get a digital version because it's an important read. So they came up with this particular 4Ps model where you've got process innovation, product innovation, paradigm innovation, which is about changing the mindset. Also position innovation, sort of, how do you leverage your USP, unique selling point? Because sometimes it's not just the product or the service, but also something else, how you position yourself in the market compared to your competitors. Especially if you're doing something similar, how do you stand out? It could be a delivery or an e-tail, electronic retail, and your USP, unique selling point, is you offer door-to-door services, 6 hours delivery time. Average delivery time is 6 to 7 hours, like some of the e-tails in China and Japan, and also in Singapore. So even if, well, the thing is, I can choose between 2 to 3 e-tails, but then I choose you because of your delivery speed. I might get the same product elsewhere, same price, so there's no catch, but just one thing that could change the way you define yourself in the market. Now here, I would like to say one of the things is most of the time we are looking at product and process innovation. The usual tendency is to take examples from the tech industry, which I've been trying to avoid. I mean, just think about it. We talk about SpaceX. Okay, SpaceX is going back. So to go online and everybody's talking about SpaceX. How many of you here? We've got 26 participants. How many of you have bought your tickets to Mars for Christmas? No? Okay. So what really practical aspect do you think anybody is serving with space? It's a great hype. It's fine. We're going to space. We've been to space a number of times now. It's great. But look at some other industries where there's a societal problem that's being solved. People are benefited because of this innovation. So I've taken one example here. There's a Michigan State University study. I've given you the link. Check it out later. Not now because I'm still here. The example that they've chosen is just fantastic. I was trying to avoid the tech examples. So they have used this model in the context of the medical technology, medical industry. So it's just one of the things that they mentioned, I think, for product innovation was how they have used the GPS technology, geographical positioning system, GPS system, geological positioning or geographical positioning system, GPS, GIS, and remote sensing for inhalers used by asthma patients. So you've got asthmatic tendencies and you take the inhalers, you need the inhalers. They're using GPS technology that way doctors can track the medical condition on an ongoing basis of the patients and continually revise the prescription and the medical treatment. I think that was really a very good, useful innovation. So read this particular article. They've used different examples for each one of those 4 P's in the context of medical technology. So it's also a way to identify if you are going to be an investor in business, or if you're thinking of starting a business in a particular industry. These cases gives you enough ideas. What's going out there, who are the big players, what sort of ideas that they are generating, what sort of technologies are being developed, and so on. So that's the link up here. See if you can use it. By the way, I've got nothing against SpaceX. It's great, but also know the ground innovation, ground level innovation that's benefiting the society at different levels. Now I'm going to speed up a little bit here, but no lecture, discussion, chat, even a pop talk on entrepreneurship and innovation is complete without mentioning Joseph Schumpeter. Now, if you have heard of him, that's fantastic. If you have not, you have just now, please read Joseph Schumpeter's Theory of Innovation. This is the first proper work conducted linking entrepreneurship and innovation. So he coined the term, the concept, the process of creative destruction. So new firms, so there are other authors who came later who also coined the term destructive creation, but both in the context of capitalism. The Economist, I don't know how many of you actually read The Economist every month, they still have got a column on Schumpeter. I mean, he's gone now, but people still continue with his work. So basically, he was talking that as new technologies and services are developed and as new innovation takes place in society, it sort of replaces the existing ones. So if you look at how companies cannibalize their own product, whether you're looking at how Amazon Kindle cannibalized the electronic book market, or how Zara and H&M with their digital technologies in sort of designing clothes sort of replaced the previous ways of clothing design. So Joseph, unfortunately, I don't have time much to talk about this, but there's a book here, which is one of the finest reads, Joseph Schumpeter, Dynamic Economic Change. So it talks about capitalism and also how capitalism is going to end on its own merits. But the term to take away at this time is the concept of creative destruction. And one of the essential points that he mentioned is innovation is incremental and cumulative over time. So that's pretty much it with Joseph Schumpeter. Moving forward, the different types of innovation, we have looked at product, process, disruptive, and also paradigm and position innovation when you looked at John Besant's model. But there are other forms of innovation here, this long list. So I'm just trying to share it step by step. You have continuous innovation, where it's not a radical innovation, it's just an incremental innovation. where simple changing or improving of an already existing product, where the adopter still uses the product in the same fashion as they had before. So in it sort of innovation in the automobile industry is a good example. Small changes, but that does redefines the product. Then you've got dynamically continuous innovation, for example, changing the consumption pattern or how that can be altered, like CDs, compact discs. I mean, if I'm sure maybe some of you have not seen a CDs because it's sort of dated, but when it came out, obviously it was a big deal given the size and the mobility. And then finally, I've got the discontinuous innovation. This is something I would like to, this is where I would like to use one new example that we have not looked at so far. Is have anybody heard of a Hyperloop? Hyperloop either by Virgin or Tesla. Now, I've just been following this model for a very long time. My thinking was it was initially Virgin who came up with the concept, and then Tesla also entered the market, and now it's being used. So it's basically a transport for people and also for freight movement. Okay. So basically, they use three things. You've got the tubes, you've got the pods, and the terminals. So do some research, see what's Hyperloop. It's a new and the fifth mode of transport that we are going to use in the future. Okay, so Virgin Hyperloop, sorry, Galactic takes you to space. Virgin Hyperloop is something that you can move from London Heathrow to Singapore in 3 hours. If they can make it. So I think they tested Hyperloop and it worked. Tesla tested it, a trip from Los Angeles to San Francisco. I'm not sure how long it took, but it took a lot less than what it would take if you're flying. So that's a great new innovation. Again, practical, discontinuous innovation, Hyperloop. Okay, so happy to pick that one up in the seminars also. The textbook also looks at this particular, the 4 stages. If you say that I'm an innovative organization, basically you should be able to articulate on these 4 steps. So you've got the first stage, which is searching. How can we find opportunities for innovation? Where are the great ideas coming from? How do you capture them? Do I need to partner, or do I have in-house capabilities? Have I built dynamic capabilities inside my firm? These are all key terms in the context. The second stage is selecting. What are we going to do and why? What problem are we solving? Where, when is the time correct? Timing of sort of introducing that innovation or new product is important. Otherwise, the market has got limited absorption capacity, newness absorption capacity. So if you launch too many products all at the same time, people just don't know what to do with it, and then you disappear as fast as you have appeared. Third stage is when you actually implement it. How are you going to make it happen? Again, is it just going to be you, or are you going to partner with others? Which markets are open to it? What are the risks? And the fourth and the final stage is capturing. How are we going to get the benefits from it? And how long can we sustain it? So if you think that you're doing well with each one of those 4 components, then you can say that you've got a clear innovation strategy. Also, more importantly, remember this, it's not just enough to have these, but making sure that you've got a consistent pipeline. Because if the pipeline of ideas or creativity dries up, what's next? Okay, so that's another model to point out. Not really model, but sort of the steps identified by Joe Ted and John Besant. So where do innovations come from? It's I'm obviously not going to go through all of them, but just have a look at these and see what sort of kickstarts innovation from time to time. Sometimes regulation can also lead to innovation. Sometimes you get shock to the system, like the amount of time that we are spending on Zoom and Teams since March 2020, and how institutions had to digitalize and digitize 2 different things. The systems, because of these imposed new circumstances, led to various different innovation in the field with these technologies that we are using today. Also, if you're exploring alternative futures using lateral thinking practices and see what sort of innovation could lead from there. Also, let's say the last one I'm going to pick up will be understanding customer segments and their value propositions, especially if you are following an open innovation model where you do invite other stakeholders to be a part of your innovation process. Then you get the feedback from them, and then you continually improvise and improve things. So I'm sure you'll have different examples for each one of them, but just make sure that you can also highlight some of them and see the organization that you're going to study for your assessment, which one applies for them. It could be a combination of them, not necessarily just one, which is actually quite unlikely. It's always a combination of them. But there are two different types of innovation. So it could be knowledge push innovation and need pull innovation. So where the innovation is coming from. These type of innovation is coming from the organization. So you don't talk to the customers to see what they need. I mean, of course, you know what the needs are, but what sort of technology is going to be useful for the next generation printers or 5D printing. Sorry, this one, knowledge push innovation, or the next set of mobile technologies that you're going to use. It's important because I remember Henry Ford, the gentleman who actually took us out of horse carriages. So basically, he was the first person to get us a vehicle for mobility. He said that if I had to ask people what they need, they would tell me that they need faster horses. So that sort of ideas, you can't really make a breakthrough innovation. So forget the horses, let's get an engine to sort of move the automobile. It's simple terms. So in some areas, some innovation comes from the industry, comes from the farms rather than from the customers or the market. Then you've got antibiotics and fiber optic cables and so on. These are knowledge push innovation. If you're failing to do it, let's say if you take the example of photocopiers, how Xerox used to be #1 globally for photocopying, and then they faded with time because of the size, the mobility, the portability of their devices, and so on. So those who did well, same in the camera market, excelled within a short time. Second type is the need pull. So sort of new product lines that you're continually developing and new product launches, new product development, and introducing the new product in the market. It's risky because if you're pushing too hard, really, that you have to have new collection every 3 months, let's say with Zara or H&M or whatever, any industry, or an iPhone, every year you need to have one. Again, the question is, are you drying up your pipeline subsequently? Because you're constantly pushing. So initially it might have been a radical innovation, but slowly you're heading more towards survival innovation. So sort of little tweaks, little changes, and positioning it in a way so that it looks like a new, fresh innovation, it could not be big necessarily. One of the things that you could do if the pipeline issue is emerging with time is how you reposition yourself in the market. And that's really important because, the thing is, this is 2022. Let's say we're having this conversation again in 2032. Okay, 10 years time. Maybe there is no Apple, or Apple is not leading the tech industry. So they're not that big in Silicon Valley. And this maybe Google has disappeared. Sounds scary now, but that's just the way we think, we adapt. Things do change. So how they can reposition yourself, because it's not up to Google, for example, it's up to the Alphabet Holdings. Alphabet Holdings own Google, and Alphabet Holdings have got a lot of other subsidiaries, not just Google. So the priorities change, markets change, new risks emerge, and there are fast adapters, there are laggards, there are late adapters, and how the industry changes altogether because of this leading firms changing what they do or how they position themselves. So repositioning is really, really important. That way you can also rename or reposition yourself, so to speak. One of the other ways you could actually come up with need pull innovation is when you're responding to successful competition. So just like when Virgin came up with the Hyperloop idea, Tesla also piggybacked on that idea. Now you've got Tesla's Hyperloop. Similarly, Virgin Galactic came up with the idea of commercializing space travel. And then a few years later, you've got Tesla SpaceX also coming into the market, because there's a need, this big market, and you're also looking at the next 100 years, not just 5 or 10 years. Some of the innovations are looking at the long run. So basically, if you're looking at colonization of Mars, that's the idea for the next 100 years. If you look for the next iPhone, that's tomorrow's problem. So the scale of innovation, the focus, the timeline also defines what you're going to do with what you have to offer. Okay, but one of the things here I would like to end this particular slide with is, if you are in the service industry, let's say a hospitality industry in particular, service innovation, customer service innovation, that's something that you can also focus on. because if you can transform the customer experience, that is going to give you the leverage, that is going to help you maintain your competitive advantage over others, over other players or rivals in the industry. Another book here for you to read, and I really hope that you read this one. It's just such an interesting and in-depth reading. It's not a big 400 pages book. It's a relatively quick read. It's written by C.K. Prahalad. Prahalad is the name of the author, as you can see on the top left, under Emerging Global. And the name of the book is Fortune at the Bottom of the Pyramid. Okay, this is not a textbook. Again, this is for you to know sustainability. You have to know about how institutions work with each other, the business state nexus, how governments work with businesses for addressing societal problems. And if you do engage at that level, what are the pros and cons and so on. So this book also talks about the importance of understanding social innovation, not just all these companies and tech companies and others that we discuss very often, but also how social innovation has transformed lives in countries, in emerging countries, in developing countries, grassroots innovation, how innovation can also adopt a bottom-up approach rather than a top-down approach. Now, this is really, really important for you to understand. So if it's a bottom-up approach, that sort of captures the essence of social innovation. So this book is one of the many. If you're interested, I can share with you a few more. But this is an essential read, I would say, is when you read globalization or business development, this book will come up as your essential read. So I'm giving you some spoiler alert. Get used to the name, C.K. Prahalad. So he also, as one of the examples, as you can see quite a few maps here, but he looks at India also in one of the chapters, what India can be in 2022. So he looks at some of the indigenous knowledge, for example, the flowering of art, literature, and science. For example, 10 Nobel Prize winners are or have been from India. Like Bob Dylan got a literature Nobel Prize in literature, I think, in 2016, but it was way back in 1920s or 30s when Tagore got a Nobel Prize for literature in India. So the book was focusing on what sort of capabilities you have in the country that will take you forward. And again, what I like about this book is not just talking about today's and tomorrow's problems or 5 years. It's talking about generation. So what's going to happen in the next 30, 50, 70 years time. And so it's useful if you don't have to be a sort of an entrepreneur in order to read this book, just to be aware and see where big ideas are coming from and what you should be reading on, what sort of challenges are more sort of realized today compared to how it was yesterday. And so that's one of the textbooks I would like to highlight. So pick up a copy if you can, a copy and a coffee, as depending on the time. Okay, so yeah, some more examples here. Extreme users. We talked about the radical innovation. For example, anti-lock braking systems began as a premium in high-performing cars that changed the way the security systems work, and also new protocols in the automobile industry. If you're developing prototypes, what sort of regulations you have to comply with. And also some social innovation, for example, introducing biometrics for ATMs. Citicorp did it. Citi, as you know, Citibank, Citicorp is a diversified organization. And they introduced the biometrics for ATMs in rural India so that everybody can access mobile technologies, and also they learn how to use banking, because the way banking works in rural areas, not only in India, in any country, is a lot different than how urban banking works. So that was a good stepping stone towards digitalization of the rural landscape. And also the Tata's example of Nano. I don't know if you've heard of it, but you can look up Tata's Nano car model, which didn't work out in the end because of certain challenges, but it was a good move. And I would sort of categorize it under social innovation. I mean, $1,000 for a car, that's good. Okay, there's quite a few other examples in the following slides you can explore. The slides are more or less very self-explanatory. So read them carefully. You can discuss again when you get the opportunity. This is an interesting slide, how you sort of use storytelling when you are introducing new products, because new product development is something that we are going to look at next week and the following week. So if you read up a little bit on new product development, then you will connect more with what I have to say in the lecture in the following weeks. So this is an example of this video you can play later. So this lady used to feature in the popular Nescafe ads in the 90s. And I keep saying that Heineken and Nescafe. They were the leading marketing gurus in 1980s, 1990s, especially Heineken also. If you go to the Heineken factory in Amsterdam, they'll take you to a tour, through a tour, and it's about 2 hours long. This really sort of tells you all the marketing ideas that they've used over the past 2, 3, 4 decades, and they were just fantastic. And they're still leading in the US with their ads. So the storytelling approach really works well. This article here talks about post-pandemic marketing strategies. And here you will find the reference to this particular advert of this lady telling how Nescafe used to do their ads back in the 90s. Okay, I'm going to stop here looking at the time, which the Time Lord beats us all, but happy to pick up on some of the ideas that we have explored today. And yeah, so try to engage with the literature and all the readings that I've highlighted and pointed out, because it's not just about the assessment. The assessment is just a sort of byproduct that we get as a result of this module, but there's just so much to continue with. Yeah, fine. Thank you very much. Have a lovely week. Keep smiling, stay motivated, and I will see you in the seminars. And email me with any questions, thoughts, reflections, and illustrations that I would like to share. Thank you very much, everybody. Take care. Thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth, Damian, Ray.